All right, guys, welcome back to another episode of the Next Man Up Sports Podcast. And today you can see that there's three of us. Usually there's only two of us. We have a special guest with us today, Conor McPherson.
Thank you.
You excited to be on today?
I'm super excited. A lot of good events coming up.
Yep. We're going to be talking about the UFC 285 event coming up and also the Jake Paul fight that just happened with Conor. And obviously we have our two co-hosts today, me, Banning Crowley, and Colin Martin.
What's up, guys?
So I think we're just going to get right into this. We'll start off. We just talked about the Jake Paul and Tommy Fury fight, which was a huge fight over the weekend. This has been going on for almost 2 years now, and Tommy Fury won by split decision. And I'll just get that's kind of the initial, just what happened. So if you guys want to get some thoughts out there to start.
Yeah, I'll start us out. I mean, I'm not the boxing expert here. That's why we got Connor to help us out, also with the UFC stuff. But I mean, my general opinions on the fight were I was pleasantly surprised on how good it was. You know, generally, I'm not the biggest Jake Paul fan ever. Maybe it's just the social media stuff. Maybe I'm just a hater. I don't know. But I actually watched the fight in full and thought it was pretty good. With that being said, I think Tommy Fury was kind of kicking his ass. I think that it was a very close split decision. I think they made the right choice. And I can see why, earlier on in the fight, we saw Jake hit him in the back of the head. That was a point reduction. And then afterwards, there was technically a knockdown, maybe a slip. Depends how you view it. I'm sure you guys will have an opinion on that. But, that brought it pretty close. And I thought overall it was a good fight. I was happy to see Tommy Fury go out there and prove something. But I think Jake Paul still has a career ahead of him. Maybe not against real boxers, but, in a celebrity sense, I think there's something there.
Yeah, I mean, I think I had my own scorecard. I think Fury just barely won by a point or two, but I think that strategy a lot of YouTubers and less experienced fighters like Tommy Fury use is that Jake Paul used in the fight is where they wait for their inexperienced opponent to get angry, not control themselves, and start tiring out and throwing a lot of crazy punches. And I think Jake Paul kind of forgot to stay aggressive in that he didn't score a knockdown. So staying aggressive was key to actually win rounds. And I think he really didn't win any of the first 3 or 4 rounds. And even with the knockdown, he couldn't win on a decision.
Yeah, I think overall this fight, the 3 cards that we saw one for Jake Paul, 75, 74, and then the other 2 were 76, 73. I thought it was a very close fight for most of the fight, but Fury definitely had control of the fight. Jake Paul kind of went in there, and in the first couple rounds, he just kind of took the punches, and then he started to go in during that 5th and 6th round. And that was kind of my prediction before the fight. I thought that he was going to get a knockout in the 6th round just because I thought Tommy was going to gas out. And he did for a few rounds, but then they ended up finishing it off. And we did see 2 point deductions, 1 from each side. So it kind of evened out a little bit. I think the ref definitely, he wasn't the best in this fight. I think he treated it not too seriously, but obviously it's 2 guys who aren't as experienced as other main event level guys. And I think that's it's not the ref's fault entirely because this was billed as one of the biggest fights of the year just because how many people were interested in it. But it was 2 kind of inexperienced guys in the overall sense. But I thought it was a very good fight. And I think for Jake Paul, I'll ask you guys, his next step, he said he wants to invoke his rematch clause. What do you guys think about this?
I mean, personally, I wouldn't mind to see it. I think generally I might not care as much the second time around as someone that's not super invested in boxing or either of these guys. But generally, if, I think this goes for all sports and especially all 1v1 competition-esque sports. If we see a really good matchup, or in this case, a really good fight, and both parties are willing to, run it back, I'm not against it. I can see if someone like Tommy Fury maybe wants to, he might have a chip on his shoulder and say, I can do better. I don't have to go fight, this YouTuber again. And I would respect him then. I wouldn't necessarily, I'm sure the narrative's going to be that, he's scared or he's shying away or whatever. But generally, I wouldn't mind that at all. But if both, guys are willing to go at it again, I think it would be another good fight. I wouldn't be surprised at all.
Yeah, and I think it's a common theme with the YouTube boxers, like KSI and Jake Paul, the best two right now. They have the same problem of once they fight each other, their biggest rematch, they can't go up from there, and they're just like they're done making money, because that's really what it comes down to for them. And they're gonna delay that as long as possible. So I think it has to end eventually with Jake Paul fighting KSI. But for the meantime, I think Jake Paul, it if you look at any professional boxer right now, their first 10 or 15 fights are against journeyman boxers with a ton of losses in their career. So I think it's unfair slander on Jake Paul to say he needs to fight massive guys like Canelo or Floyd Mayweather now, when I think even Mike Tyson, Muhammad Ali, any boxer ever starts off their career with a ton of building up wins to gain confidence.
Yeah, I like that point that you just brought up. I think defending Jake Paul, like you said, a guy to have his first now 7 fights being against not the best boxers, but a guy like Anderson Silva, who was close to 50, but he still knows how to box. And a lot of these guys, like Jake Paul was talking about Tommy Fury's opponents before the fight, how they had like a combined record of like 30 and 250. And that's just what happens with boxers as they start their career. Like Tommy Fury is only 24. If he wants to fight, he can fight for another 10, 15 years. Obviously, he can't fight at a high level at the start of his career all the way to the end of his career. Even we see with guys like Canelo and Mayweather, they had like kind of a section where they maybe fight 1 or 2 mega fights within 5 years. But besides that, they kind of just get their record up. And like Connor just talked about, the KSI and Jake Paul fight, which they've been talking about for years now. And that's kind of projected to be at the end of this year. KSI is going to be fighting in May. He's going to be fighting Joe Fournier, who's 10-0 right now. He's won every single fight by knockout. And he was a former WBA light heavyweight champion. And there's a lot of belts, but he was ranked 11th in that division at one point. So definitely a big step up from the last guy that he was fighting. So, I mean, seeing this now that Jake Paul just lost to Tommy Fury, if KSI wins this fight, he definitely has the upper hand. He's definitely the A side in that scenario. But if he wins and Jake Paul decides to fight Tommy Fury again and he loses, I don't even know if KSI wants to fight Jake Paul, because at that point, he's already beat a boxer, and obviously Jake Paul couldn't beat him. But whenever they fight, if they do fight, it's still going to be probably one of the biggest boxing matches of all time, which is kind of crazy to say, but there's so many people invested in this, and like there's going to be a lot of people that want to see this happen.
Yeah, for sure. So what I'm going to do right now, considering I'm not going to have a ton of, talk on this one, I just like to introduce the UFC, the topic, and I'd like to hear what you guys have to say about it. In our notes here, we got UFC 285 coming up. I just want to hear like your general feelings on the matchups, and like, you guys should break it down. So Connor, you want to start this one out?
Yeah, I mean, the next like 3 or 4 main UFC events, without not including the fight nights, are massive fights. And this whole card's pretty good, honestly, even down to Bo Nickel at the bottom. Like, he's one of the most hyped up prospects right now. It reminds me a lot of like a Sage Northcutt. Like, the UFC's right now, so many fighters like Rosas, the 18-year-old, they're just promoting so heavily to get their next star, as the last generation of like McGregor, Adianza, and Ngannou kind of phase out of the UFC on their way out. Khabib's gone. They're promoting their younger fighters now. So I think that will be a really fun fight. And then going up to the main card of Jones versus Gane is a massive fight, because the division's a little weak at the top without Ngannou, but there's a ton of contenders just like Gane. But he hasn't been invincible himself and almost lost to Tuivasa. But Jones has been gone for 3 years. He might be undefeated in the actual fights, not including the out of the octagon events, but it's still going to be interesting to see if he could cement the GOAT status possibly if he wins this fight.
Yeah, I think we'll go into depth a little bit about 3 fights that we're kind of intrigued with. First, starting off with Bo Nickel versus Jamie Pickett. Bo Nickel, who is arguably one of the greatest college athletes of all time across all sports, probably the best wrestler of all time. And he's coming into this fight as a huge favorite. The odds on him right now are minus 1,400 to win this fight. And I think this is just kind of another tune-up fight, kind of just get him to get more experience in the ring. And personally, I have I have Bo Nickel winning in the second round by submission. In a 3-round fight, I think that he's going to just try to take him down in the first round. But I think Pickett's going to be able to escape him a little bit. But I think in the second round, Nickel is just going to take over and he's going to make him tap out.
Yeah,
And
Connor, I'd like to hear your prediction on that one. Sorry to jump in front of you.
Yeah, no, you're good. Yeah, I think that Bo Nickel and his UFC fights have been in the first 2 minutes, he's been submitting his opponents very easily. And as Banning said, he has a huge wrestling background, one of the best college wrestlers. He's fighting the Olympian wrestlers and he's winning against a lot of them. And so I think that, yeah, Pickett's just another vet for Nickel to take on his career to fighting better and better fighters through the gauntlet. So I think it's going to be a first round submission by Bo Nickel. I think Pickett has good stand-up game. He's been submitted multiple times in his career. And I think it's just going to be another light fight for Nickel.
Yeah. Next one, we're going into the co-main event, Valentina Shevchenko versus Alexa Grasso. This one is for the title. And Valentina is a big favorite again in this fight at -600. This one's a little closer than the Bo Nickel fight, but I do think that she's also going to win in the second round. I think she's going to win by knockout. She's just been amazing. She's been on a big run right now, and I don't really see her losing this fight or really any time in the future.
Yeah, I think this is just going to come down to a really good fighter just making another like title defense, a big defense at the top of the division. I think it's good. I had a second round KO for her too. I just think this is not the opponent that's going to dethrone her. It's going to be someone in the near future, though.
Yeah,
And then,
sorry to cut off once again. I was just going to introduce it, one more time. We have the title fight, or sorry, the top of the card, I should say. We're seeing my knowledge really seep in here. So, as my little fake hosting right now, Banning, I want to hear, let's go in depth on it.
I think this fight is going to be a really good fight. John Jones coming back. He hasn't been fighting for a while. So obviously he might have a little bit of rust, but he, like Connor alluded to before, this could cement him as the GOAT. I think a lot of people already have him there. But I think obviously if he wins another title, he's definitely going to be the greatest of all time in the sport. But this is going to be a really close fight. Like you said earlier, when Gane fought Tui the last fight, he had a lot of good strikes and he ended up beating him. But Tui was just standing in there. That was a really entertaining fight because Tui would just take those shots and keep striking. But I think John Jones coming back now, I think he's going to be a lot more elusive, and we haven't seen him fight at heavyweight. So that's kind of where I don't know where this is going to go, just because he's adding on a lot of weight. But we've seen some footage of him fighting and sparring. So I think overall, I'm going to take Jones in a decision win because I think it's going to be really close in the end. I don't see either fighter finishing the other. I think this is going to go 5 rounds.
Yeah, I think it's a lot closer than a lot of people are really agreeing on the internet. And 3 years is a long time. And Jones bulked up a lot to be a heavyweight. And he looks a lot bigger in the footage that's been out that his camp has been releasing. He looks a lot bigger. And I think he looks definitely ready to go, not out of shape, but it's going to come down to training for both of them. Both of them have had public training issues and like problems outside the octagon. But I think it's a stylistic matchup here where Jones has the Greco-Roman background and then Gane is Muay Thai. And you kind of saw it in the Tuivasa fight with Gane where if he can stay on his feet and just take the hits, it happened in the past multiple fights, that he's a good fighter on his feet. So I think if he can keep the fight up top on his feet and not on the ground wrestling, that he can tire out Jones. I think Jones's fitness will be his downfall in the fight later in the rounds. And I think we could see a Gane by KO if he stays up, but I think Jones, his takedowns will be too good, and I think he's going to submit Gane.
That's interesting. I mean, obviously this is a really close fight. -155, Jones is the favorite, but in a UFC fight, we usually don't see lines that close a lot of the time, especially for these main events. Even the last fight we saw Islam and now I can't think of it.
I'm not going to help.
Volkanovski.
Volkanovski, yeah. I think even with that one, the lines were I think -250 or -300. So definitely a close fight in this one. I think people aren't really giving Gane the credit that he deserves because he's been a great contender. And I think if Jones didn't come back at this point, Gane would definitely be the champion because I think he probably was the best heavyweight at the time. Obviously, with Ngannou leaving, and I think this is going to be a really good fight, really close.
Yeah, and just to butt in with one more thing on the fight, uh, looking at the past of John Jones's fight, he's been like undefeated in all of his fights, obviously without the PED incidents and other doping stuff, but he's obviously all of his fights dominated every single one, even against Cormier. But there's been 3 fighters I watched again where Santos, Machida, and Dominic Reyes and Gustafsson, where they stayed on their feet, didn't let any of his takedowns just work on them, and they just kept the fight up on their feet. And he was getting outstruck a lot, outboxed sometimes, and he really didn't look as confident on his feet, but on the ground, he's just way more confident and dominates them. So I think it's going to be key for Gane to stop the takedown attempts.
Yeah, I think it's going to be really interesting, especially fighting straight up too. I think Jones is, especially with the bulk now being a heavyweight, it's going to be a lot different because we're going to see how his striking is, because obviously it'll add a lot of power with that weight, but we just have to see how he kind of moves with that weight. And wrestling, he already has the good ground game, but with that extra weight too, leaning on Gane, we could definitely see. I don't know if we'll see a submission, but I do think we could definitely see a lot of control time, like we saw in that last fight with Islam, which some people might be mad about, especially if Gane gets in a lot of strikes and Jones has a lot of control time. We could end up seeing another decision where they favor the control time over the significant strikes. And I know we talked about that last time about the Islam fight, so I kind of just want to hear your opinion on that.
Yeah, well, it's been in a lot of main card and title fights recently where Peter Yan, Islam Makhachev, Kimaev, like a lot of the time they get control on the ground, like in the Volkanovski fight, the last main title fight, where they're getting control on the ground, and they're getting back control or whatever they need or whatever their takedown attempt is, but there's no damage being dealt. It happened to Sean O'Malley, why he squeaked by in a decision is because he wasn't taking damage on the ground, and he was getting taken down, but just fighting it off and getting up. Same thing with Volkanovski. And I think Jones is going to have to really rely on the ground and pound. I think that's how I see the fight finishing. If it does in Jones's favor early, is that he's going to have a nice takedown, and then Gane just won't be able to stop anything on the ground. He'll be too tired by that point.
Yeah. I think that ground game is essential for Jones for the win. And like you said, I think Gane's best chance is definitely to get into a striking match, because if they're both standing up, I think Gane has the advantage in this point, and especially with the weight, we don't know how John Jones is going to be able to handle that weight on him, especially standing up too.
Yeah, I think when it comes down to it, it's just going to be a stylistic matchup of which one can dominate in their style, because Gane's ground game is not his style. It happened against Ngannou, who's also similar to Jones. They have dominant stand-up and ground game, but Ngannou dominated him on the ground and really won the fight between them because of that.
Yeah.
All right. Well, if that's going to do it for our UFC and boxing talk, I would like to thank our special guest one more time, Connor. Give your applause right now. Perfect. All right. Thanks for coming out with us, Connor. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
We'll see you probably in another episode soon. We got a lot of UFC fights going on and a lot of boxing events going on. So definitely see you on an episode coming up soon.
Yeah.
Big credit to our next man up, Fighting Wiz.
All right.
Word.
I think next, if we want to dive right into it, baseball has been a hot topic, spring training going on. So we have a little less than a month now until opening day. So we kind of decided with the 6 divisions, we're going to split this up over 3 weeks. And today we're going to talk about the AL East and the NL East, and we're going to talk about our predictions. We have their over-unders for each team in the division, their win-loss record, and we also have the rankings that we have. So if we want to start with the AL East,
yeah,
you can go right ahead.
I mean, I'm really looking forward to the year, and I think we're both happy to start in the East. I'm a Blue Jays fan, AL East, big Phillies fan, right next to me,
Mhm.
or on the in the pod right next to me. So this is stuff that like we take personal as well. And I've been really into baseball this off season. It's starting to become one of my favorite sports. So enough of the talk. I'll get straight into it. I don't have the over unders directly in front of me right now. So if you want to throw them out after I put the record predictions, I'd appreciate that. You can
Yeah.
just interject, no big deal. I'll start with the AL East. And first, I have the Yankees, and I have them going 95 and 67, which is
Okay.
just under, right?
Just over. They're at
Oh, just
94 and a
over.
half.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not going to get deep about these teams, so I'll just throw like a sentence afterwards. I think they just have one of the best rosters in baseball. It's pretty
Mhm.
simple with them. Number two, I have my Blue Jays. I have them going 90 and 72, which I assume is over.
It is under. They're at 90
Oh,
and a half. So you're very close on these lines.
yeah. So this is
Vegas
me
is
with
loving this.
I know this is awesome. But with the Blue Jays, I think that's a really good line because I think
Mhm.
they're kind of the epitome of a 90-win team. Their roster is really well done, but you get nervous about the pitching. And I think at the start of the season, that's going to be an issue. But when guys like Chad Green and hopefully Ryu come back midway, around June, which is going to be pretty late into the season, hopefully earlier than that, they come back. But I think that will ease things up. Three, I have the Rays at 84 and 78.
Okay. So a bit under. They're at 89 and a half.
Okay. Yeah, and again, I mean, I like a lot of the things going on around there. Underrated pitching, but I just think they have a pretty tough schedule out here in the East.
Yeah.
Number four, I have the Red Sox, and I'm guessing I'm under on this one. I have them going 75 and 87.
Yeah. They're a set at 78 and a half right now.
Yeah. So I mean, they had big losses in the offseason. Losing X at shortstop was kind of a big deal for them. I mean, as you would think. But Devers on the extension, I think he's going to come out and have a good year. And it's improved pitching. So I mean, I don't think they're going to be horrible, but in the 70s, 80s is where I see them. And then right under them, I have the Orioles going 74 and 88.
So a little under. They're at 76 and a half, but pretty close to all the lines in all of
Yeah.
your projections.
So I guess my final opinion on the AL East is I think it's a really good division generally.
Mhm.
I think the Yankees, Blue Jays, and Rays are all going to have postseason possible pushes, and Boston could shock us. If they get some good middle infield play, I don't think they're going to be bad at all. But yeah, I think Vegas has some good lines. I'm going to try to pull up the NL East ones in front of me so we don't have to bounce back and forth next time. But
All right.
what do you have in the AL East?
So first, I have the Yankees at 93 and 69, just under their total of 94 and a half. I think they're a good team. Obviously Aaron Judge coming back, but in a very competitive division, kind of like you had, a lot of these lines are going to be really close. And then I had Toronto at 2. I had them going 92 and 70, so just one game under the Yankees, but I do have them going over their projected win total of 90 and a half. I think they're going to have really good hitting this year, and I think they're going to come back with a vengeance last season after losing in the first round. And at 3, I have my big surprise of the year. I have the Orioles at 86 and 76. I think they're going to have an amazing year, and their total is at 76 and a half, and I have them soaring over this by 10 games. I love Gunnar Henderson. I think this team is really young, and I think they're going to start clicking together. And I think they're going to have the best future in this division just because the rest of the teams are kind of already solidified. I definitely see them pushing for a playoff spot.
Yeah, I
And then
mean,
at 4, yeah,
just to butt in one thing on that. I just wanted to say I really like that pick. For me, I having the Orioles at 5th wasn't because I think they're a bad team. I think they're an extra year out. But I mean,
mhm.
we see Rutschman, we see Henderson, like they could have a really solid year this year.
Yeah, I think we both agree that they're close, but it just
Yeah.
depends on this year and that leap that they want to take. And then at 4, I have the Rays going 84 and 78. I have them just kind of under by 5 games of their projection. I think in a tough division, especially having Baltimore kind of be the next team up, I think 4th isn't bad, but all these teams, like they're only 9 games within the Yankees. So we could definitely see a big push. They're only 2 games behind the Orioles in my projection. So I think it's going to be very competitive. And then I have the Red Sox at 70 and 92. I think they're in for a bad year, especially in a competitive division. Their projection is 78.5. I think they're going under. I don't see them winning 80 games. I just think this team, especially with the pitching, the injury that has happened, and just overall, I don't think they're going to have a great year. And obviously the offseason loss that you talked about too. I just think in a competitive division, the Red Sox aren't going to be great this year.
Yeah, I think that's fair. To kick it over to the NL East, I have the over/under totals in front of me now. So, and first, I have the New York Mets. I have them going 93 and 69, which is right under their total of 94.5. I think having the first is kind of it's a hot take and it's not at the same time. If we look straight at the rosters, it's a pretty good take, but every year the Mets met and screwed up at the end. But I think this year they'll at least hold on to first. What they'll do in the playoffs, I couldn't tell you. Second, I have the Atlanta Braves going 91 and 71, which is also under for them. I think the Braves are a great team. I have them in the Mets, going all the way to the end of the season like they did last year. But I just think they have a really high projected win total. And they have obviously studs on their team, but they have some of their best players are younger guys. I look at Michael Harris, I look at Spencer Strider, and they were phenomenal last year, but we can't project these guys to have amazing years every year. At least that's not how I think. Third, I have the Phillies, one game behind, going 90 and 72. That puts them right at their over. I think it's a really good line. The Phillies are, you might have a different opinion on this. I think the Phillies are right around a 90-win team. I have them with the same record as the Blue Jays. I think they're comparable, so I like that. Miami, I have 80 and 82, which is a couple games over. They have great pitching. Josh Chisholm could look forward to a good year, but outside of that, I'm not loving them. And at the Nationals, I have them going under at 54 and 108. I think they're probably the worst team in baseball. There's not much to say about it. You blew up the team to improve your farm system, but if we're looking at this season alone, you don't have really much going for you.
So number one, I have Atlanta going 97 and 65. I think they're one game over in my projection. I think this team is going to be really good this year, and I think they're going to take the division again. They have a lot to come back from too, especially last year. They had high expectations again, and obviously Philly ended up beating them in the playoffs. But it's like we said with the last division, I think the top three teams in this division, it's going to be very competitive, just like your projections, all pretty close. So it's going to come down essentially to their in-division play, just depending on who beats each other. Because if they all have the same record at the end of the year, which could happen, I think they're all very close. It's just going to come down to who beats who. And then number two, I have Philly. I'm a little biased in this, but I do think getting Trey Turner on a team that just went to the World Series, I don't see how they don't win at least 90 games. I know their line set at 89.5. I have them going 91 and 71. So just one game over you and two games over the projection. Without Bryce Harper for the start of the year, obviously going to be a little hard, but adding Trey Turner and also having great hitters on the team, I'm not that worried about it. The only thing to worry about really, in my opinion, is the defense. A lot of people are saying defense is going to be really bad, but when I look at this, I would rather have a really good offense than a really good defense, which I usually don't say in most sports. But if you have guys out there who can hit a home run at almost any pitch, which is a guy like Kyle Schwarber, a guy like Rhys Hoskins, who really started hitting well at the end of last season, and then Alec Boehm, who started off almost leaving the team at the beginning of the year and then ending as pretty much a 300 hitter. And then obviously guys like Nick Castellanos, who had a bad season last year, but I expect him to have a bounce back year. And JT Realmuto, who I think is the best catcher in the game right now. And then you have some young guys too, Bryson Stott. I think this team's going to do really well. And especially with Harper coming back at All-Star break, hopefully, that's the projection as of now. If they're really got into sync by then and you add Bryce Harper into the lineup, I think that's dangerous. And then number three, I have the Mets going 90 and 72. Third place might be a little shocking, but they're only one game behind Philly and only 7 games behind Atlanta. So we could definitely see a swing like this. I think the top three teams are all really close. But they obviously brought in Justin Verlander this year, but I don't know how good he's going to be. I don't know how many games he's going to play. Him and Scherzer could end up playing 15 games combined. We just don't know. And I think on paper, like you said, they have a really good team, but we say this in every sport, you don't play on paper. So we'll have to see what happens. If they both pitch 20 plus games, then I think that'd be good for them, obviously. It could definitely get a lot of wins there. But if they don't play that many games, we don't really know. And then I have Miami going 72 and 90, just a little under their projection. Jazz Chisholm's an exciting player. They have an exciting young team. But I think, especially in a tough division, they're just not going to really be that great this year. And then I have Washington going 58 and 104, just one game under their projection. I think, like you said, probably the worst team in baseball right now. Basically, you could probably demote them to a AAA team and then just bring someone else. We could bring the banana ballers in or whatever they're called. Just fan of bananas. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think both of these divisions, very competitive.
Yeah. I mean, before we kick it out of the MLB, I just want to throw one more comment in on the Mets, because I think that was, I mean, we both think they're going to be good, but that was our biggest difference out of either of the divisions. I think it's interesting, and I think you brought up a really good point about, Verlander's good, but how many games is he going to pitch? And I think that's kind of what we've been seeing from DeGrom like in his career. And I would say DeGrom is a better pitcher than Verlander, which is a hot take because, Verlander just won the Cy Young, but, we got to bring age and stuff into it. Yeah, exactly. But I mean, the Mets have had success and really good records with their best pitcher not pitching very often. So if Verlander does, pitch, 20-ish games, then I think that's an improvement more than anything. Yeah. So I think that's probably what put him to first for me. But let's kick it out of the MLB for now.
All right. I think we can bounce over right now to do you want to talk about the NFL or the NBA? I think we have a lot of points for both.
Yeah. Let's wrap it up with the NBA. So let's go straight to the NFL right now.
All right.
All right.
You want to start?
Nah, you insist.
All right. So the first thing we're going to talk about right now is the Bears are officially, we've got word that they're kind of leaning towards trading that first overall pick. Kind of a little bit surprising that we're finally getting some word about this now. I think a lot of people have mocked teams like the Colts there. Even the Texans, we've had mocked to pick to move up, even though they could have had that first pick if they really wanted to, but they wanted the pride win instead. But I think there's a lot of teams that could definitely trade up, and we are seeing a bit of a surge for that Anthony Richardson #1 overall pick. His odds went from plus 2,000, plus 2,500, whatever it was, to plus 750. And this reminds me a lot of Trayvon Walker last year. At this same exact time last year, he was plus 2,000, went to plus 750, went to plus 200, and then day of the draft was the odds-on favorite, and it changed like that. So my question right now to you, it's kind of early out, but we have seen this story before. Do you think you would take that Anthony Richardson odds right now?
So we're gonna talk about something a little later, the combine, that's gonna make me bring up a different guy that I think will be Trayvon Walker at the same position. But as of right now, I would not take the Anthony Richardson odds, and that's purely because I think he wavers so much on different teams' boards. I think when you get a guy like that has made his college, he's a 1-year college starter at Florida, who had a pretty bad season. If you count team success, it's not looking great. And if you count production, it's also not looking great. It's just you're banking on the physicals and how much you can develop him. And honestly, if I'm one of the worst teams in the NFL, depending on who trades up for the first pick, I'm not really trusting my development all that much. I want to take a guy who could be a stud without, having to sit. And that would be a guy like Bryce Young. Or I'm shooting for the fences. I feel like you got to go all out one or the other. And as much as I hate Will Levis, if you're going to shoot for the fences, I think he might be a better pick than Anthony Richardson. That being said, Anthony Richardson is my third quarterback in the draft. If I can be honest with you, he's trending towards 2. I'm a huge fan. So if a team does take him with the #1 pick, I don't think it's going to be a horrible pick. But just based off what I'm seeing and, the fact that at the end of the day, the Bears might be, stuck with the number one pick. Maybe they don't have a trade market they like. I wouldn't take Anthony Richardson's odds. That makes me want to ask you, how would you feel?
I think I have to wait for one more movement. If it moves to plus like 500 now from plus 750, then something's definitely happening. It's interesting to look at that line because last year, I know we both had mock drafts with, we didn't have Jalen Carter at 1, not Jalen Carter. Now I'm getting, yeah, I get the
how it goes.
Georgia guys mixed up. But last year we definitely,
you're talking about Trayvon Walker.
Trayvon Walker,
who went 1. And
yeah,
I hate to interject, but we had Hutchinson going first for both of us for a while.
Yeah. So we both had Hutchinson going first, but I think we both knew once the draft started to come around that Walker was going to go 1. We both necessarily didn't love the pick just because we thought Hutchinson was better. But I think at one point we kind of just saw that it was going to happen and everyone kind of knew, but we weren't really sure until the draft happened because we're like, this guy doesn't really deserve to go number 1. Are they really going to do it? So I think that could happen this year with Richardson. I do really like him, but I don't think he deserves to go number 1. I think if it does move a lot more though, like if this goes down to plus 400 or something like that, I think he's definitely going to at least go in the top 10 because someone's going to trade up for him because there's going to be a lot of people kind of looking at him and the media controls who's drafted at the end of the day. A lot of teams can watch a lot of performances from guys, but these guys who make mock drafts kind of just decide who's good. And that's kind of what we saw last year with Trayvon.
Yeah. And I mean, with the combine approaching, I think the Bears are in a great position to trade their pick. Obviously, it would come a little closer to draft day. But I mean, with the combine in mind, I mean, there's a lot to talk about with this. I'm not necessarily a combine geek, but I get really interested in what trends send people up and down. So I'm going to start out with this. I mean, when we're talking about some of the biggest risers, I don't have a ton of followers on my list. You never know until it actually happens. But when it comes to risers, my little Trayvon Walker that I'm starting to see is Lucas Van Ness from Iowa. I don't know what happened, and I've always liked him as a prospect, so I don't particularly mind. There's some buzz for him to go top 5 now, and that came out of nowhere to me. He went from second round to barely first round to, top 20, top 10. Now I wouldn't be surprised if there's some buzz at number 1 when we really get to the draft. He's going to go into the combine. He's going to measure great. He's a beast. A teammate talked about him, and I forget which one. They described him as like 6'5", 280 with a six-pack. He looks like a Greek god, and he can run. Like, he's got quickness. He's got agility. He's going to do great in the 3-cone if he runs it. So I see a guy like that, and I immediately think that's a combine riser. And in the same vein, Tyree Wilson from Texas Tech, I mean, he's already getting the top 5 buzz. There's some people that say he's better than Will Anderson Jr. With a really good combine, I think that might be a common opinion. Personally, at the end of the day, I'm still a big Will Anderson Jr. fan. He's going to be my top edge unless some things really start shaking up. But we could get to a point where the draft rolls around and Will Anderson is the 3rd edge on people's board. I don't really know Will Anderson's availability for the combine. I don't know what or if he'll be participating in certain things or at all in general. But I really see guys like Van Ness and Wilson, and they have the ability and the opportunity to jump Anderson. So if you have some big risers, I mean, I have a couple other guys, but I'd like to hear yours.
Yeah, talking about Lucas Van Ness, I had him going 8th last mock draft that we did last week, and you had him going 9th. And even a month or two ago, I had him kind of towards the end of the first round, kind of start of the second round. I think he's really risen up, but I think the thing that we have to look at this year is the cornerbacks, because there are a lot of guys that are very close, and especially with the NFL kind of leaning towards those smaller cornerbacks. If some guy breaks the record on the combine, he's probably going to get drafted first. We see that happen every single year just because everyone wants to take the risk on someone that's fast. And also the receivers too. Obviously, we have Quentin Johnston, who's kind of the number 1 guy on most boards. But then we have a lot of guys after that. Jordan Addison, Jalen Hyatt, Jackson Smith, and Jigba. And if one of those guys breaks the record too, if one of those guys ends up running a 4.2 or something like that, and even a guy like Zay Flowers, who he's put on, I think, 10 pounds I saw the other day for the combine. If he put on 10 pounds and then he ends up running like a 4.2, he could definitely be drafted as the second or the third receiver. So I think a lot of those guys obviously have to have big draft days.
I'm going to cut in really quick because that was my other point that I wanted to touch on, and you brought it up really well. I think there's two guys in mind because I look at super fast receivers. I think when we see the guys like Johnston, Smith and Jigba, and Addison, yes, their 40-yard dashes matter if they're really good or really bad, but we about know where they're at. With guys like Jalen Hyatt and Tyler Scott from Cincinnati, these guys blaze. They're so fast. And I was listening to a reporter, once again, forget the name, my apologies, talking about how Tyler Scott is legitimately a top 5 receiver on people's boards. And if I can be honest to you, as someone on a sports podcast right now, couldn't have told you who he was a month ago. So if he, we see this happen all the time with, guys, I know it's a different position, but Chris Johnson, running back for old running back for the Titans, or, a more modern example who obviously didn't turn out too well, Henry Ruggs, these guys, John Ross, another one that didn't work out too well, just playing wise. I mean, we see these guys that maybe didn't have the best stats throughout college or, the year before they get drafted, run in the 4.2s and get picked really early. If I can be honest with you, I think Hyatt and Tyler Scott will both run right around a 4.2. They blaze. They're so fast. So I know that's a common concept, but I'd especially look out for those two in this year's combine.
Yeah. At the end of the day, if someone runs really fast, they're going to get picked in, depending on what kind of prospect they are, obviously. If there's a guy that's projected as a 5th round guy and he runs really fast, he's going to jump more than a guy that's already in the 2nd round who might just end up at the end of the 1st round. But those guys that are close to the end, like a guy who might be undrafted, who runs like a 4.25, a team's going to take a risk on you. You can spend a 3rd day pick on a guy that runs really fast and then just throw him out there and see what happens.
It's special teams if it all goes wrong.
Yeah. I think overall, kind of to wrap it up, my biggest jump that I think we're going to see is Joey Porter Jr. I love him as a prospect, and I think he's the best overall cornerback in this class just because he's really one of the big cornerbacks in this class. And I know there's a lot of smaller cornerbacks, and the NFL is leaning towards that, like we kind of talked about. But a guy like him who's bigger, who can play safety, I think as long as he does good in the combine, doesn't even necessarily have to do great. But if he does do great, obviously we'll rise him up more. But I think he's definitely deserving of a top 10 pick. And I think as long as he does good at the combine, we'll see that.
Yeah. Moving on to our last NFL point, or, second to last, kind of our last big one, I should say, is the quarterback free agency market. I mean, we're getting to a point, we have draft season, we have free agency. Teams got to start making decisions. Yeah, we're early on at this point, but, we're seeing new coaches hired, new management. This is where you make or break your season right here. And I think the big one right now, who we should probably be spending the most time on, is Lamar Jackson. I mean, he and the Ravens are clearly having problems because the Browns ruined the QB market with the fully guaranteed Deshaun Watson deal. And, Lamar, I think almost rightfully so, wants more than that. He's a better quarterback than Deshaun right now, so he wants his contract to reflect that. So, I mean, I'll just say my opinion first. Personally, I think he's either going to figure it out with the Ravens, whether that be a franchise tag or like an actual agreement on maybe a shorter term deal, or I think the Raiders are going to go get him. There's some buzz for that right now. I think people would really like to see Devontae Adams and Lamar Jackson pair up. I'm one of those people. I also think, in the Raiders offense, it almost makes sense. I feel like when you have a rushing attack that hopefully should still be pretty good next year, Derek Carr just kind of slowed things down. And we'll talk about him more later on. But in general, I could see Lamar Jackson fitting in with that team really well. And it would just make the AFC West even more crazy. That would be by far the best division in football. So I'd personally like to see it. But what do you think about Lamar?
The top 3 teams right now that we have the Falcons as the favorites, the Panthers at 2, and the Raiders at 3. I think the Raiders are interesting because we've also heard buzz about Aaron Rodgers potentially going there, and the Panthers too, potentially getting Anthony Richardson or Will Levis in the draft. So I think it's really interesting on what we'll see. And I kind of like the NFL's approach where they don't have the draft and free agency at like the same exact time. I think that's good because then you figure out what you need and then what you need to get. And I kind of like how the NFL does that. And I think the Falcons being the favorite is really interesting. I think it would be a really good fit for him to go over there. And then especially with a guy like Kyle Pitts, who's kind of been underdeveloped and underused in his time. If Lamar goes over there, Kyle Pitts reaches his potential and he's at least like maybe not turn into Travis Kelce, but he has the potential to. And I think he could definitely turn into a guy like that, or even a guy like Evan Ingram, just a little better, just because he already has that. He has that age on him, and he's a little bit faster and bigger. But I think the Falcons would be interesting. I do think he'll end up working it out with the Ravens. I think they'll probably do a franchise tag, and then he'll ball out in the first few weeks, and then they'll be like, okay, we got to actually pay him this time, because the Ravens still, I think they still have a championship window right now, but you can't keep dragging it out. Lamar's not going to be young forever, and a guy who runs as much as he does, we've seen this happen before with quarterbacks. He's not going to be able to do that for 10, 15 years. So he does have a good arm, though, which kind of gets not talked about as much. He does have one of the best arms in the league and can throw really well. But you can't have him just be waiting around, being in limbo forever, because he's not going to be happy and he's not going to perform the way that you want him to. And the Ravens can't really afford to lose him.
Yeah. No, I mean, if the Ravens lose him, that turns the franchise on their head. The Ravens are the Lamar decision away from being Super Bowl contenders or worst team in the league, genuinely.
Yeah. I mean, they did have a Pro Bowl quarterback this year.
Yeah, they did.
In Lamar's absence.
That says more about the Pro Bowl.
Yeah, just like the year before when we had Mac Jones in the Pro Bowl.
Oh, yeah, worst Pro Bowl quarterback ever. I'd rather have Tyler Huntley. Anyways, we're a little out of order here, but since we just talked about the Raiders a bit, let's talk about Derek Carr. For me personally, I'm going to New Orleans, and not necessarily because I think it's a great fit, which, it kind of sucks. But I don't think the Saints have a lot of better options. They don't have a draft pick that's going to put them in good position to draft a really good quarterback this year. They clearly are not going to roll with Jameis Winston. He hasn't played amazing, but he also was hurt a lot. So I don't think that's a genuine option. So that puts Andy Dalton there again. Andy Dalton was never meant to be the starter pretty much on any team he's gone to since the Bengals. But it always turns out where he's all right and he's serviceable. But to me, at least, the difference between Andy Dalton and Derek Carr is drastic enough where it's worth going out and getting Carr for a year or two. I think best case scenario for Derek Carr, he gets a 2-year contract with the Saints, has a good year this year. The Saints roll with whoever quarterback they think will fit them well next year, maybe a Drake May type, and then Derek Carr gets a mentor for a year. I think that's best case scenario, and I don't think Derek Carr or the Saints really have many other good options. So I think it'll work out this way.
I really like the prospect of him going to the Jets. I think that's kind of, a lot of people have been talking about that. They said that if he goes there, he can end up in Canton. That's definitely a take. They're definitely trying to get him there, but I really like the idea of that, him going there with the young receivers and being able to just kind of do his thing, because he's not going to have he will have high expectations in the media and stuff, but the Jets aren't expecting him to go in there and be an MVP caliber quarterback. There will be a lot of people on the outside though, but as long as he kind of blocks that out, they have guys like Garrett Wilson, Corey Davis, Elijah Moore, and even Denzel Mims is still on the team. We don't know if he'll actually be on the team next year. He's kind of been on and off, but I really like him. Offensive line, they have a lot of young guys. Yeah. A lot of young guys on the offensive line too. And I really like the idea of him going there.
Yeah, I think that's a good fit. Let's get next to Geno Smith. Let's just try to go in order now. For me, I think it makes the most sense. He's going to be a Seahawk again next year. I know the contract projections are kind of crazy. I think they're going to work it out to get more of a short length deal. I saw 3 years, $100 million a while ago. I don't think we're going to be looking at that. I think this would be perfect for the Seahawks. If I'm Geno Smith, I might be pushing somewhere else, but the Seahawks should look to get him for at least another year or two. I think that leaves the option of them taking a guy like Will Levis or Anthony Richardson this year, which would be super interesting. And Geno Smith is the perfect guy to, stay in front. I know he's been kind of one of those guys that's been pushed into a backup role more often. I don't suggest that, but if he can get a contract where he can be the starter and then the Seahawks bring in a predecessor, I think that would be a good deal for both parties.
Yeah, I think he definitely should stay there. if they can get him on a 1-year deal, I think that'd be perfect. I think it'll end up probably being 2 years because he really wants that guaranteed money, and I think he deserves it at this point in his career. I don't think he's going to be as good as he was last year necessarily. That was probably his best year of his career, but he'll still be solid. I think that there's a lot of NFC teams that are getting better, so I don't know if they're necessarily going to make the playoffs like they snuck in this year. I think the Lions improved a lot and could have made it into the playoffs if the Seahawks lost that last game. But I still think they're going to be hovering around anywhere from like 7 to 9 wins, which isn't bad, but that still leaves you the option to draft a quarterback. And especially next season when the quarterback class is right now looking really good. We don't know what's going to happen with how players play, injuries, if they stay or not. But that leaves the Seahawks in a really good spot, in my opinion. And even if they underperform this year, that puts them in an even better position because they have a guy that can mentor a quarterback that they could pick next year.
Yeah.
So I think it's definitely good for him to stay in Seattle.
Yeah, I totally agree. Next we have the Daniel Jones bullet. I'm going to let you do most of the talking on this, our Giants fan on the podcast. But, my 2 cents, I think he was completely ridiculed by the media for no reason. I'm nothing close to a Giants fan. I would love to see him suck, but he has proved he's an above average quarterback this year. He did not, his biggest knock that I've always had on him is he loves to turn the ball over. If it's not interceptions, it's definitely fumbles. He was great at ball security this year. It wasn't even a problem. And the Giants had a really, sneaky but solid playoff run. They beat the teams they were supposed to beat. It came down to a poor showing against the Eagles in the end, but the Eagles made the Super Bowl. I think Daniel Jones is the future quarterback for the Giants. It might be, a Kirk Cousins-ish situation where, he deserves to play, but he might not be your best player. I think, sure, we'll see something like that. But I'm rocking with Daniel Jones. I'm sure you feel similar, but
yeah, $45 million a year. I'm not signing Daniel Jones back, but I think they're going to be able to work something out. The problem with it is it's not Daniel Jones' fault to want $45 million. It's every single other quarterback that is demanding money to be paid. And Daniel Jones is kind of he wants the money that everyone else is getting. And you might look at this and be like, oh, he doesn't deserve as much as Patrick Mahomes. Obviously, he's not as good, but he's a young guy that you can lock up for 5 years who is going to play above average. He played above average with guys last year who probably should be in the XFL. Like Richie James was not good. Isaiah Hodges, surprisingly, Richie James. I was being nice to him.
Yeah, no,
because he had one good playoff game.
He doesn't watch our podcast. Richie James is one of the worst receivers in the NFL that touches the field.
Yeah.
I like Isaiah Hodgins though.
Yeah, Isaiah Hodgins, very good pickup, and especially if they draft a guy in this draft too. I think Daniel Jones will have a good year and possibly bring back Odell. You never really know what happens. We did get the news that their greatest receiver in franchise history, Kenny Golladay, would be leaving after this season. But maybe they'll sign him back for the veteran minimum.
Yeah.
Give him $900,000 a year. I'd be fine with that. He does have one legacy catch against the Eagles. But I think Daniel Jones, $40 million, I'll take that. Because I think you got to pay him. You can't let him go because that messes up the timeline a lot. If you have a team that just made the playoffs and won a playoff game, whether you want to say they got lucky or not, the team's going to get better in the offseason. And if they shouldn't go down, I think they might not peak as much as you would expect getting better in the offseason, but I still think they're around 9 or 10 wins, especially with the Eagles. In my opinion, they're not going to be as good as they were this year. They're losing some key people just because of that money too. When a young team has a lot of players that are good, it messes them up. So they're going to lose some players on defense, but still a competitive division. And if you get rid of Jones, you're just kind of screwed because you're in a spot where you don't know who's going to be quarterback. And you can't have a team who just made the playoffs, made it to the second round, have Tyrod Taylor start at quarterback.
Yeah. No, and I totally agree with your whole assessment right there. The Eagles assessment I thought was really on point. Lastly on our list, we have Jimmy Garoppolo. He's not necessarily the most exciting quarterback on here, but I think it's pretty fair to assume he's going to be out of San Francisco with Trey Lance and Brock Purdy having their own little competition. Me personally, I think, this is related in a sense. I think the New York Jets are going to win the Aaron Rodgers sweepstakes. So I think that's going to be an offseason change. But with that being said, if Aaron Rodgers doesn't end up going to the Jets, I think Jimmy Garoppolo is probably the guy that slides in there. And then, in the situation where they do actually get Aaron Rodgers, and I get my prediction right, I think the Commanders are another team to look out for if they can't get anything in this draft. I think, the Commanders are in such a weird place where, they can compete and they do until like halfway through the season every year. I think a guy like Jimmy Garoppolo has shown that he can win if he has the right team around him. I wouldn't necessarily say the Commanders are that level, but you get Jimmy Garoppolo there, that's a team that can make a wild card and, hopefully make some noise. So I'm saying Jets or Commanders, depending on some other offseason moves.
Yeah, we did just see Carson Wentz officially being released after they did a lot of trading to get him, and he was their guy. But I think Jimmy Garoppolo is in an interesting situation because depending on what team he goes to, he could either be the starter or kind of just be on the bench the whole season. I did have Derek Carr leaving the Raiders, going to the Jets. So I think he could Jimmy Garoppolo would go to the Raiders in my scenario. I don't think that would be a bad spot. And in a very competitive division, I would say that they're the worst team. They do have a really good team. Even with Garoppolo, I think he'll be fine. And he's really good at hitting the ball off. We saw that with the 49ers. And depending on if they keep Josh Jacobs or not, right now it's kind of in limbo. But I don't know how the Raiders would be able to kind of work with that scenario, because if he doesn't pass the ball a lot to Devontae Adams, that whole trade's going to be messed up. And I think the Broncos are going to get a lot better than they were last year. I don't think they can get worse, basically.
No.
I think they'll bounce back and be like an 8 or 9 win team like they should have been last year.
Yeah.
So I have Garoppolo going to the Raiders.
Yeah. One last point in the NFL. We'll just do this really quick. You put it on the sheet, made me super happy. The NFL's talked about removing the push play a couple weeks ago in our podcast episode before the Super Bowl, or right after the Super Bowl. I mentioned how that's something that they should look at. I'm interested in seeing what the rules would be in place to stop that, because I think you've got to get really particular, or else you're ruining regular QB sneaks, which I don't have a problem with.
Yeah.
I think just the push play that we saw in the Super Bowl a lot, where it's get your 4 biggest dudes behind the quarterback and push them all at once. I think that's almost unstoppable for defenses. And I'm a big defense, supporter, so I don't particularly like it. But at the end of the day, I don't think it's going to make or break the game.
Yeah. I think the only problem with this is if they do get rid of it, we're never going to hear the end of it from Eagles fans.
Yeah.
They took away the one play that we're good at. They won't let us do it. The NFL's against us. And especially after the holding call that we saw in the Super Bowl, the Eagles are going to have a big chip on their shoulder.
Yeah.
But I think at the end of the day, the difference between the NFL and college football, the main difference that I always saw is college football, when the running back has the ball in his hands, anyone can push him and he could end up going for a touchdown from 20 yards out. And the NFL I always saw as the league where they just never pushed players just because they always blow the whistle. So I think getting rid of this, it doesn't affect the game that much. So I wouldn't be opposed to it. I think it's kind of like the Kenny Pickett fake slide. It's kind of just it's an offensive advantage. And when people say that the offense has too many advantages now, I think this wouldn't be a bad thing to get rid of. We obviously hear the arguments that quarterbacks are protected too much and the offense just has so much more of an advantage against the defense. So I think this would kind of be able to kind of make it a little more even.
Yeah. All right, sweet. Let's kick it over to the NBA. I think that's the last thing we have on the docket, right? If I'm not mistaken. Yeah. So one of our big points, and I think this is coming a lot from how a lot of teams are making, their playoff pushes right now. And we're seeing some dudes that have never won a ring before showing out. I mean, up behind me, there we go. Up behind me, we got Damian Lillard. He's a big example of that. But same time. But like, to get more general, me and Banning broke down 5 players that we think are under the most pressure to win a championship right now. And I'm going to let you start your list first. You can go 5-1, 1-5, whatever you want.
Yeah. I'll start with my 5. I had an honorable mention in Embiid on this list. I think he's definitely under pressure, but he's still a younger player. And I think the Sixers, this season, they're obviously a contender, but a lot of people see them behind the Bucks and the Celtics, which makes sense. So I think if we get to next season or even the season after, he'll definitely be on my list. But I think right now he's kind of at that sixth spot. Number 5, I have Jason Tatum, who is obviously a young player, and I kind of just talked about that with Embiid. But losing last year's finals and playing very well this year, and the Celtics, I think, in my opinion, being the best team in the NBA, I think he's definitely under a lot of pressure this year. I don't think necessarily Jaylen Brown is under as much pressure as him, just because a lot of people kind of see it as a 1-2, not necessarily like a 1A and 1B, like I'll kind of mention later in this list. At number 4, I have Kawhi and PG. What I just kind of said, I think both of these guys, a lot of people see them as 1A and 1B, and they both went to the Clippers at the same point. And I think this is their best chance. Last week I said I had them in the finals, and that's kind of why I have them in this 4 spot. I think they definitely do have 1 or 2 more years together, but if they win a championship this year, then you can lock them up for a few more years and be happy with it. But if you don't win this year, next year, you're under a lot of pressure because that potentially could be their last year together. Number 3, I have James Harden, and I had Embiid off of my list just because I don't think he's in the same spot as Harden. Harden's a lot older, and Embiid's obviously the more developed player at this point in his career, averaging 33 points, and Harden's kind of taken that step back. He's still playing very well. Should have been an all-star, putting up very good stats, the best in assists this year, and he's played his role perfectly. And going into this season, I said I expected a lot out of him. A lot of people expected a lot last year, but I think with a full off season, we finally get to see James Harden kind of in the spot that I expected him to be in this year, which a lot of people expected last year. But I think he's third because kind of like a guy like Dame, he's a little older now, Harden obviously, but he's in a spot where he's a very good player, a top player all time, but he doesn't have the ring. And we'll talk about this later. Dame talked about it. Players can get tarnished without a ring, but he's a guy where if he wins a ring, especially kind of not as the best team this year, the Bucks and the Celtics kind of have more expectations. But if the Sixers can make a push, I think that's definitely an impressive ring for Harden to win. It's not like he just went on a super team and then ended up winning it. That would definitely push him into, honestly, I'm going to say it. If he wins a ring, I think he's a top 15 player of all time. I think his prime was very good. People underrate it. 36 points a game in your prime is just absolutely insane. And I think he's a top 15 player if he wins a ring.
Yeah, if he gets a ring, you got to start talking about it at least. You know, I wouldn't commit to that now, but if there's a championship this season for James Harden, it's going to be hard to argue anywhere out of top 20 at least.
Yeah, I mean, if he wins a ring, I'm taking him over like a guy like Moses Malone, who is, I'm pretty sure he's at like 15 or 16 on my list right now. Number 2, I have another combined. I have CP3 and KD. Chris Paul has been under a lot of pressure recently, especially the past few years in the Suns. Obviously, they made the finals a few years ago against the Bucks. They fell short, but CP3 coming towards the end of his career at this point, obviously under a lot of pressure, and that kind of ties in with KD, who just got there. I think both of these guys are under pressure. I don't have Devin Booker in this spot just because I think he's too young at this point. And I think he could definitely go to a different team. And I don't think he has as much expectations as CP3 and KD, just because CP3 doesn't have the ring. And now KD joining kind of just adds them both together, even though KD does have 2 rings. I know Charles Barkley just talked about this. He said KD needs to win a ring to kind of shut up the old guys like him. He did say, even though, because a lot of people don't really count those Golden State rings. He said he needs to win a ring as the leader and the best player on the team. Even though Kevin Durant did win both finals MVPs in Golden State and was the best player on the team, I can see where people are coming from at this point.
Yeah.
And then number 1, I have Jokic. If he wins 3 MVPs in a row and doesn't win a championship this year, which like you have him in the finals, I think they're definitely a contender to make the finals. I think they'll probably be in the Western Conference Finals against the Clippers, and I think that'll be a great series. I think if Jokic doesn't win right now with his best shot, I think the team will definitely get better. But as we see a team like the Suns they'll mold more over the offseason, the Suns getting better. we never know what's going to happen with the Lakers. They could definitely get a free agent. Teams like the Clippers might get better too. I think Jokic is definitely under the most pressure because 3 MVPs, and if he doesn't win a ring now, I don't think it's the end of the world. He definitely has more of a time frame to win a ring, but the conversation we'll start to hear more because last year, after he won his second MVP in a row, a lot of people were talking about maybe it's time that they need to kind of go all in to build around him. And this year they're the first seed. So I think we're going to hear more people talking about 3 MVPs in a row with no rings. What's going on? I don't think it's necessarily his fault, but I think this is their best chance. So I think he's under a lot of pressure.
Yeah, and I love that Nuggets team around him. Going to my list, Embiid is not on my list. I don't have him listed as an honorable mention, but I think it's a great pick. I just wanted to touch on that. That if I revise this, he might be in that spot. Number 5, I have Tatum as well. I mean, Celtics fan here. I think we're probably the favorites right now. That's who I'm rooting for, but also who I would pick. If I was betting. But I think Tatum gets a lot of scrutiny from the media, which is fair. He's a young, really good player in a huge market. I think it's time for him to, if he wins one right now, that sets him up for a legacy career. Like, these dudes, he's about the age where, we see guys like Kobe and LeBron win their first rings and then go on to have these amazing, immaculate careers. And I don't necessarily project Tatum in that spot. He's still only 19. So there's not, a whole lot of.
Yeah, he's got time. He's got 20 years.
Yeah, he's got a huge career in front of him. But genuinely, I think now is about the time where we see some all-time greats win some rings. If he wants to set himself up there, which he clearly does, I think it's about.
He is Kobe.
Yeah, well, I mean,
he's got him this year. I got you.
He's got him this year. I'll text him. 4, I have KD. I think you brought up the Charles Barkley reason. I don't have CP specifically here, but I think I would add him in. I didn't do any slash players, but I think both of them under the same kind of pressure. CP almost even more. But I think we got to see, the Suns went all out for this team, put together this star-studded squad. This is a team that should win the ring. Once again, on paper, they don't play the games on paper. But when you look at it, this should be a finals favorite, and they need to succeed for, any of their offseason to make any sense. Number 3, I have Damian Lillard. I know it's not going to happen this year, so this is a weird pick. And I'll admit that right now. The Blazers obviously aren't going to make the finals. But just in general, I think Damian Lillard is such a great option because his whole deal is that he's so good and doesn't have the ring. Once he wins the ring, there's not going to be a lot of knock on Dame Lillard. And I think the biggest problem is he going to really do it in Portland or not? We see dudes like Tracy McGrady go play their last year somewhere random and win a ring. So it's added to the resume, even though they didn't do it as a star player. Is that the way we're going to see Dame win a ring, or is he going to get traded, next year, or is Portland going to actually bring a team around him? I feel like we get in this weird, hating on Dame Lillard thing. Not you specific. I mean, you have your moments, but I think in general, where we act like the Blazers have ever put a good team around him. No, they haven't. He's had some decent teams. I like Anthony Simons. Nurkic has had his good years. Jeremy Grant is cool, I should say. But we don't have all of those primes going together without injuries. Dame, without a doubt, is the best player on his team all the time, and usually playing with bums. He'll always have a guy or two. He had McCollum forever. But these guys aren't a championship-winning squad. They don't have better players outside of Lillard, like a team like the Nuggets do outside of Jokic or the Sixers do outside of Embiid. He doesn't have that. And he, obviously it's relevant right now. I got him on the wall. He put up 71 the other night. That, there's no argument that he's past his prime. Obviously, he's not directly in his MVP stages, but he can still play basketball. That can be the best player on a championship-winning team. You just have to put the championship winning team together. So, anyways, that's not going to happen this year. That's not a hot take, but I think he's still under some pressure. Number 2, I have Jokic. I'm a big Jokic supporter, but for all the same reasons you said, it's going to be 3 straight MVPs this year. You got to start getting rings eventually. The Nuggets are running out of excuses, and this is coming from me. The Nuggets are like my secondary squad. I watch them every night. But you have one of the best coaches in the league. You have a great team around your best player. You got to figure it out in the playoffs. If we see a guy like MPJ have a good playoff run, they win the finals. He's kind of my X factor determining guy here because,
Yeah.
I've told you this, I've told some other people my phrase, Michael Porter Jr., he has the angel on his shoulder, Carmelo Anthony, and the devil on his shoulder, J.R. Smith. Who's he going to listen to when the playoffs come around? And then
J.R.
for the
Smith.
sake, yeah, probably, and for the sake of speeding it up, number one, I have James Harden. I think he's in a similar position to Dame, except he actually now has the team around him. He's had an amazing year. All jokes aside, yes, he should have been an all-star. And, he doesn't even have to be the star player on his team to win a ring this year. He won't be because you have Embiid next to him. I think there's pressure. Obviously, I would agree that the Sixers aren't necessarily Bucks or Celtics level right now, but I think they're pretty close. I think if Harden and Embiid can put together a playoff run where they both play great and they win a chip, I'm with you on putting Harden top 20, top 15 easy.
Mhm.
So I think maybe it's not immediate pressure because he has a little bit of time, but if he does it this year, that's going to be huge for his resume.
Yeah, I think we can make this easy for everyone and just put Jokic and Dame on the Sixers, and then we solve it all. I mean,
Yeah,
Jokic
well,
said that he'll play with Embiid, so we could see that happen. We just run pick and roll every single play of the game.
we're going to move on
End
to
up
the next.
having Korkmaz as
No.
the starter because they trade everyone else, but that's
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. He requested the trade. Just to kind of bounce off this, we'll bump down to one of our later points because it's very relevant. Damian Lillard said that he feels like players get tarnished without a ring in their legacy. What's your opinion on that?
I think it depends on how you look at it. I think if you're in the moment and we see all these players playing great, then you kind of look at guys and you're like, oh, he didn't win a ring, but he's still a really good player. But in 50 years, when you look at the stat sheets and you compare them basically on the stat sheets, like kind of how we do with guys like Bob Pettit and I mean, anyone kind of from that like 60s, 50s to like 70s timeline
Bill
where
Russell.
they're all kind of, yeah, like Dolph Shays.
Yeah.
We kind of
Wes
just,
Unseld.
yeah, we're not watching every single game that they play. So we're kind of just basing everything off the stat sheet. So a guy like Dame, you can look at his numbers, but in 50 years, if he doesn't have a ring, then it's really going to hurt his legacy. I don't think it's fair necessarily because, especially now, within the past 10, 15 years, it has been a league of super teams. There's not really a lot of teams that have just had one star that have made a championship run. But I think the last time we kind of saw that was, I would say, the Heat when they made the finals against the Lakers with Jimmy Butler, because Bam was not the Bam that he is now. The rest of the team wasn't that great, but that was different circumstances and stuff. But now with all those teams building super teams like we see with the Suns, it's not fair to the players that it hurts their legacy. But I mean, a championship is the pinnacle of being a great player, whether you agree with it or not. That's just kind of how it always has been. And that's kind of why we look at guys like Jordan and Brady as the greatest players of all time, just because they have so many rings. Even a guy like Bill Russell, if he doesn't have 11 rings, I don't know how good he is as a player, averaging 19 points a game.
Yeah, I mean, probably one of the best defensive players of all time, but how well does that translate to us talking about it in 2023?
Exactly. I mean, we can't see that. We can look at it through the stat sheets too, but like,
yeah, well, they didn't even record blocks until he was like 35. Like, you don't really know these things. I'm just gonna bounce off what you said. I'll be quick and to the point on this. I agree and I don't agree for the kind of the same reasons you said. A ring is a huge deal in a player's resume. But with that being said, we do look at guys like Iverson and we do look at guys like Stockton and still recognize them as some of the best players ever. Not as high as they would be with a ring, though. I think if you're Dame, I'm sure he doesn't worry about this stuff. He's got bigger fish to fry. But if you're Dame, I wouldn't worry about people forgetting about you. Like, he's going to be recognized as an all-time great player. But if you want to bump from, getting, excuse my language, getting shit on for being a top 75 player to being a consensus top 50, the ring does it, honestly. So I think that it affects your legacy, but when you're already as good as he has been in his career, it's not necessarily make or break. I wouldn't say tarnish, I guess.
Yeah, I think like we'll look at it too, kind of like the same argument. In 50 years, and you look at KD's legacy, you see as of right now 2 rings, and you don't know the circumstances of him joining the 73-9 Warriors. You're not going to be like, oh, those rings don't count. Like our grandkids aren't going to be like, oh yeah, Kevin Durant, he joined the best team in the league. Like that, it's not going to be common knowledge at that point, especially in 70 years, because so much is going to happen. So I think unfairly, it kind of does hurt their legacy a little bit. But at the end of the day, if you watch Damian Lillard play, if you watch a guy like James Harden play, you're going to be able to see that he's I okay. Well, I was going to say all-time greats. I don't know if Dame is an all-time great at this point. I do think Harden is definitely a top 30 player
I think
without
it
a ring.
depends. I think this isn't really part of our conversation, but I think it depends what you call an all-time great. If you call all those dudes on the NBA top 75 all-time greats, he definitely is. But that gets to a point because then you're gonna have to start calling dudes like Dwight Howard all-time greats, and it's like
Anthony
where
Davis.
like where do you fall on that? I think it's wow. Since they're currently playing, we're not gonna.
It's
But
hard.
In 20 years, I think we might go back and call guys like Dame all-time greats.
Yeah.
That might just because we're old and stupid, but who knows?
So the next point I kind of want to talk about, we did see LeBron get hurt the other night, so this kind of changes the trajectory. I wouldn't say a huge amount, but definitely a little bit. The Lakers making the playoffs. I think the rest of the team has definitely stepped up, and this definitely does change it. But the Lakers are standing at the fifth least hardest strength of schedule for the rest of the season. So they're not playing that many very good teams. They do end up playing the Rockets twice, the Bulls twice, the Thunder twice, the Pelicans, the Raptors. So I think even with LeBron out for 2 weeks, if he was out for the rest of the season, I think we could both agree that this is like completely no, they're not making the playoffs. So that's kind of why I know you kind of seemed a little shocked by the point where I said that this might not be huge. But if it ends up being 2 weeks, that's like 5 or 6 games. I don't think it changes that much. Right now, they're only 2 games out from that 7 seed and only 4 games out from the 4th seed. I do still think the Lakers are going to make the playoffs. I know that might be a hot take, but I think they're going to be fine over these next few weeks, especially with that schedule. If they had a really hard schedule, I think that changes it. But I mean, they're playing in these next 2 weeks, they're playing the Timberwolves, they're playing the Warriors without Curry, they're playing the Grizzlies, obviously a hard matchup, but they're going to end up playing the Rockets twice. I think they're still going to make the playoffs.
Yeah. I mean, the strength of schedule was a big thing. And I'll be honest with you, that's not something I really took into account, but I have seen that, and that makes a lot of sense. I think we fall into this trap of, and I'll say it bluntly, thinking the Lakers are way better than they are. You listed all those teams they played. I mean, what? They'll beat the Rockets. All the other games are a toss-up, or I honestly think they're going to lose. And that's not me trying to be a hater, but especially without LeBron, like, this is going to be one of my craziest takes, and you can take this out of context if you want. I think we undervalue LeBron sometimes, not in the sense because everyone knows he's good. Everyone knows he can score, blah, blah, blah. The Lakers, in LeBron's old age, run the entire offense and defense through him, whether it's getting him the ball, getting the right matchup, whatever you want to call it. That's their whole team. And yes, the Lakers, thank God, with D'Angelo Russell, Jared Vanderbilt, Anthony Davis, hopefully staying healthy, that's a really good team still. I'm not going to pretend like they're horrible. So they could definitely make a playoff push. Play in, I would say, is almost a lock. That's how I feel on it. But if we're talking like genuine, actually making the playoffs after the play in, I'm still going to say no. I just don't think they're good enough. It's not, I think LeBron is going to play out of his mind. I think they have the right pieces around him. I just don't think they're a good enough team in general. And if they do make the playoffs, I see a lot of buzz that an 8th seed Lakers would be a 1 seed Nuggets. Not even close. If that's a matchup in the first round, I'm betting the house on Nuggets 4-0 sweep. It wouldn't even be close.
Yeah, I think it's interesting now because if they're in that mix for that play-in, they're definitely going to be against. They're going to be against the Warriors, the Jazz, the Timberwolves, the Blazers, Pelicans, depending on those teams. I think they definitely make the playoffs in that point. I think they could beat the Warriors with a healthy LeBron. I think they beat the Jazz. They might lose to the Warriors too. I think both of those teams could make the playoffs.
Yeah.
But I think they definitely could if they get in at the 8th seed. I know it's not good for them. I know it kind of hurts their overall morale because they were supposed to be this really good team this year, especially after the break. I think if LeBron doesn't get hurt, completely different argument just because they've been looking really good recently, especially with the biggest comeback against the Mavs the other night.
Yeah, that was crazy.
And but obviously injuries happen. But we'll have to see what happens with this. We can talk about it a little more kind of once LeBron comes back, because if he is out for 2 weeks, then it's not as huge of an issue. But if he's like a month and then he comes back at the very end of the playoff push, that puts a lot of pressure on them to win every single game. But we can talk about this more.
Yeah, and I also think an obvious factor that we covered, these next 2 weeks are going to be make or break. If the Lakers like come close to winning out, I think they're definitely making the playoffs. If they play average to below average, it's going to be tough, and we're going to have to wait and see. Yeah.
So next, another injury, we'll kind of bounce off of that. The LaMelo Ball injury, obviously getting hurt the other night. I think it's a fractured ankle, broken ankle. The Hornets haven't been amazing this year, but this kind of, I think it hurts their trajectory a little bit overall. They're in the running for the number 1 overall pick. So some people might be not happy that he's hurt, but obviously this makes the team worse. So they could definitely get better odds. But you always want to see a young guy on a team like that because they're going to get a top pick no matter if he plays or not. The team's not that good. And I thought they were going to be a little better this year than they were. They're sitting at 20-43 right now. Obviously, they're not going to make the playoffs, but I thought they were going to be like at this point of the year, I thought they were kind of be closer to like a 30-win team because I thought LaMelo would just play a little better, the rest of the team around him. But they're right now, they're sitting at the 4th worst team in the league, and they could definitely drop down to a top 3 team and get those odds. But I want to know from your perspective how you think this affects the Hornets team overall.
Yeah, I think more than anything, you have to blow up the Hornets at this point. Like literally or figuratively, you got to blow up the Hornets. I hate that organization. They haven't done anything since the 90s. They were overrated in the 90s. They got carried by Alonzo Mourning, and they brainwashed people into thinking Muggsy Bogues was really good for a long time. Bro had like 3 really good years. I love him, but whatever. They've been doing absolutely nothing, and I hate it. I want the Hornets to be good. It's fun for basketball, but they just bring in dudes, and they're either hurt or lazy. And I have a Terry Rozier jersey, Celtics one, but I've been a fan of Terry Rozier. I don't even think he tries, and after he tries for a while, he gets hurt. Gordon Hayward's a mess. You knew that going in. I see talented dudes on this team, and if I can be honest, like you got to do something drastic. This LaMelo injury just proves that because he's your star player and he's not always available. Obviously not his fault, but that just hinders the progression even more. I really like what they have in Mark Williams. He genuinely could have been a top 10 pick last year. And I'm just nervous. Like, obviously you want this high pick, but what do you do with it? Hopefully you can get Victor or Scoot. But if you get Victor, you're stopping the progression of your best young player outside of LaMelo. I think Mark Williams will be that good. And if you get Scoot, are you going to drop LaMelo to the 2? I think, obviously, if you get the 1 or 2 pick, you're going to have to go with one of those decisions. But this was a Hornets team, like you said, that really wasn't supposed to be this bad. This shouldn't be stuff they're thinking about. They should be thinking about how do we move on from Terry Rozier and get a stud next to LaMelo. Instead, they're thinking about which one of these 18-year-olds is going to save our franchise when they just did that a couple of years ago with LaMelo. I feel like it's a continuous cycle of, oh, let's get this young dude to save our franchise. Oh, he's either hurt or he's not as good. Let's do it again. This seems like a crazy rant about a team that I personally don't really care about, but it just frustrates me when NBA teams stand in mediocrity. Like, if you asked me about the Rockets, I'd be getting even more mad right now. It's just how it goes.
Yeah. I mean, like you just said, I was almost going to say they're basically the Rockets of the East at this point. They're depending on a high draft pick to pick a guy to save the franchise. And I've been a LaMelo Ball fan since day one. I love him as a player, but he's not a guy at this point in his career who is going to be able to take over a team and lead them to a deep playoff run. I mean, he's going to if he stays there by himself pretty much his whole career, he's just going to end up like Bradley Beal. He's going to end up
He's
like a
gonna be
superstar who can score a lot, and the team's just not going to be that good.
it's gonna be a worse Bradley Beal situation. At least Bradley Beal had hope. Like
Yeah.
I don't even think I don't know. If you told me the Hornets were gonna lose out the rest of the year, I'd probably say it's possible, which is crazy. I wouldn't even say that for Houston. It's just a mess over there. And you've been a LaMelo supporter since like his freshman year of high school. And I haven't been on the train that long, but I'm definitely a fan. I want to see him succeed. And I would like to see him succeed in Charlotte. It's just, I don't necessarily blame Michael Jordan, but is Michael Jordan as an owner going to get a GM in there that can do something? That's kind of a big question.
Yeah. I think at this point too, obviously it's kind of weird depending on what pick they get, but I know it kind of sounds weird, but if they get the number 1 overall pick, I don't know if that affects them in kind of like what you said. It kind of sets them back a little bit. So I think even if they get the 3rd pick and they take a guy like Amen Thompson, I think that would be good with LaMelo just because he's not going to be as like highly like scouted as a guy like Scoot Henderson, who's going to have a lot more expectations. But if you put him in there, I think he'll be able to fit with LaMelo, right? Or even Asor, depending on which one you like. But I think either one of those two guys, if they get the 3rd pick or the 4th pick, depending on what happens, we'll have to see more with the draft coming up. But I think one of those two guys to be able to put next to LaMelo would be good. And I don't know if they're going to sign. They're not going to sign a huge free agent, but like we even saw a guy like Gordon Hayward when he got there and he was healthy. He was playing good. It helped them a lot. And I think overall, we're not going to see them take a huge leap, but it's just kind of sad to see a young superstar be on a team that's not good and not helping him at all.
Yeah, I mean, my final 2 cents on this topic is that, I agree. It's almost better. Obviously, they're going to miss out on a better player, but if they get that 3rd pick, then get one of the Thompson brothers or a guy like Brandon Miller. Like Brandon Miller's a guy that always finds a way to get his shooters involved. So I think it could be a really good fit.
Yeah. I think on to the last point that we'll talk about after that comment is this hasn't really been talked about a lot. I kind of just thought about this the other day. I was looking through the stats and I kind of want to hear your opinion on this mostly because I've thought a little bit about it. But at this point, I know we don't really see him as it. We see him as a really good scorer overall, but Joel Embiid currently is 7th all time in points per game. Since he's put up 20 points every single year of his career, and he led the league in scoring last year with 30 points. He's the first center to do that since Shaq, and now he's at 33 points, which is a huge jump from 30 points. I know it's only 3 points, but jumping 30, anything plus 30 is insane. And depending on how the rest of the year looks, I think he will win the scoring title again, just because bringing in Kyrie, I think Luke is going to drop a little bit scoring just because 2 big guards. But if he wins this scoring title again, 33 points as a center in the NBA after a 30-year season last year, back to back. Do you see him as an all-time scorer?
Yeah, I'm sure you're going to have more opinions on this, but my general feeling is that I think, yes, he will be, but I definitely would say no right now. And only because if I say yes to Embiid, I'm going to have to say yes to guys like Luka and not Tatum, but, a guy like Tatum, Jokic, these are guys that Embiid's scoring more than, but it's pretty comparable. And I wouldn't call those guys all-time scorers yet, just because there's so much more to be seen. I know Embiid's a little farther past those guys, but, Embiid's had an injury history. He's been healthy this year so far, knock on wood. But, you're never really sure with these guys. If Embiid plays 10 more years, and I don't expect him to keep this scoring production, but being a 20 or more guy the rest of his career, absolutely. But right now I'm not willing to say it. And that's just because points per game matters a lot, but you can have a really high points per game and only play a couple years. I see Embiid as a lot more than that, but as of right now, I can't say yes. I'd like to hear your opinion on it, though. It's interesting.
Yeah, I think kind of my question now is scoring titles, they matter a little bit. Like you said, points per game kind of matters, but his overall right now being 7th in NBA for points per game at 27 points, this could change a lot. If he goes on, he's obviously his 2nd year into a 30 points per game stretch. If he goes 5 or 6 years and he ends up at 29 points per game, I think it'll definitely be different. But I think some people kind of forget that this is a guy who, while he was in the NBA, was learning how to play basketball. And at face value, you might be like, oh, well, most players get better in the NBA, but most players adapt to the game more. He didn't pick up a basketball until he was 15. And then he's only been playing at age 27, 12 years after he picked up a basketball for the first time, was averaging 30 points and the best scorer in the league. And a lot of guys, you pick up a basketball for the first time at 3 years old, you're 15. This guy is like, he's learning how to play, and every single year he's gotten better. At the beginning of his career, he was averaging 22 points, which is good. Obviously, he was kind of in that process of the Sixers, so they weren't great overall. But the past few years, he's been getting better in the offseason, and he's a threat at almost every single spot on the court at this point. He has amazing footwork, and for a guy like him to be able to like move like that as a center, and he's not like part of this new wave that we're about to see with Victor, where they're really like tall and lanky centers. Like, he's tall and big, like him and Jokic too. They're both guys that can get a bucket from like almost anywhere on the court. He shoots a little more than Jokic. Jokic is obviously the better passer, but Embiid is just becoming dominant in almost every facet. And I know he's not at the point where like Shaq was dominance wise, but if he gets to like a point where he's 30 points per game for 6 years in a row as a center, I think we could definitely start to make an argument, not him against Shaq, but being like kind of the most dominant scorer of this generation. I think KD was kind of the last generation, so that's why I'm not really bringing him into this, but it could be like a guy like KD where he can get a bucket at any spot on the court.
Yeah, and I think you're tiptoeing a little bit almost because you don't want to sound biased. If Embiid keeps this up, you can put him next to Shaq. I still might take Shaq, but it gets pretty comparable. I mean, I'll say what I want, but at the end of the day, I am an Embiid fan, and he's one of the most dominant players I've ever seen play basketball. And that goes for my entire life. I'm not even talking about like recently. So, I mean, he's not there yet, and that was my whole big point. Yeah, not yet. But, I mean, if he keeps it up, I'm going to easily say yes. I think it's an interesting topic. I haven't heard anyone else talk about this. So, I think, like, when it comes down to it, this might be an easy yes in, I don't know, 10 years. Who knows?
Yeah. I think kind of just to wrap it up, where I have him is he's either going to end up, like we said, kind of comparing to Shaq, or he's going to end up being like Dwight Howard, kind of having a really good stretch of being dominant. Yeah. But we kind of just have to see, because he's in the middle of the stretch. So it's kind of hard, but we'll see what happens with it, obviously. I think the rings will definitely take a factor into it. But overall, like Shaq kind of said, when he's asked at one point where he puts himself all time, and he doesn't really consider himself as like the greatest player of all time or like that. He puts himself into his own category of the most dominant. So in 10 years, we could see Embiid being the next guy kind of in that spot.
Yeah, I like that opinion a lot.
All right. I think that kind of wraps everything up. We went over a lot this week. I think very exciting week for us, especially with all these sports going on. The MLB is going to start to ramp up. Opening day kind of leads into the NBA playoffs and the draft. We're going to have a week where the MLB is playing, the draft is happening, and the playoffs are starting that April 20th range. So we'll see what happens then. And by that time, the start of summer, we might have an in-person setup. So we'll see what happens. And I know there's going to be an overlay on this episode, and we had a guest. So we're kind of just trying to ramp this up more for you guys. We enjoy doing this a lot, and we appreciate all the support on the Instagram and the YouTube. I know you really like doing the Instagram posts, and I think it's great overall to see your guys' engagement.
Yeah, I mean, I've had a great time with it. You know, it's very, I think we'd be doing this regardless, but seeing positive feedback and any feedback in general makes it a lot easier to keep going. I get out here and I'm inspired to, take notes. I'm inspired to work on Instagram posts, and we have great engagement. I mean, we have guys like Connor who want to come on our podcast, and he killed it today. So I've enjoyed it. I'm having a great time.
I mean, either way, if the camera's on or not, we're going to be talking about this stuff. So Absolutely. Even if we can share it with one person, whether they hate the opinion or not,
we'll see
even
what
better.
happens. Yeah. So just kind of to wrap it up, thank you guys for all the support, and we'll see you guys next week.
Thank you guys.